Happy holidays, everybody. It's Christmas Eve here in the United States of America. Some of you already probably are getting ready for bed this evening, ready for Santa in the morning to bring you some holiday cheer. But again, I want to start off by thanking everybody for a great year. It's been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot. I hope you all have learned a lot. You've taught me a lot. Doing research for episodes has taught me a lot. Just the more time you spend with your records, the more things you learn. Little epiphanies, little realizations, little aha moments. You're like, oh, okay. And slowly the puzzle pieces start to fit in where you see this transcendent timeline of what the jazz kingdom is. And it's a pretty inspirational tale. You know, we talk about the holiday cheer and the message of the holidays. Jazz has a powerful message all year round. That's about overcoming and positivity in spite of. And I have a few people that want to argue, say, I'm not even arguing. It's just really the message of the music, you know. And it's hard for me to understand how you know the history and can't think that this is what they're. And it's true. And I've said before, they don't want to sit and dwell on it. They're trying to overcome it. But part of how you overcome it is speaking about it, especially through your horns, especially emoting. But again, it's Christmas. We're going to do it fun, lighthearted episode. And I'm actually going to share with you about a record that's surprisingly better than you think or it should be. And it's a Columbia collection called Jingle Bell Jazz. And this is the initial cover right there when it was first issued in 1962, I believe. And since then, they've actually changed a couple of the tracks out and updated it with some newer stuff. There's a Hancock piece on here from, I believe, 69. Where is it at? Yeah, 69. But there's probably 10 songs, maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yeah. And it's all really outstanding, honestly. This first track is Duke Ellington, Jingle Bells, and the band's incredible. Woodyard, Strayhorn, Ray Burroughs, Ray Nance, Cat Adderson, Johnny Hodges, Russell Procope, Jimmy Hamilton, Paul Gonsalves, Harry Carney, Lawrence Brown, Britt Woodman. It's a pretty incredible lineup, and it's Ellington putting the swing behind anything he touches. Then there's White Christmas by Lionel Hampton, and it's actually pretty fantastic as well. Taylor Macero produces this in New York in '62 with Tommy Flanagan, Bill Mackel, and George Duvivier. Ozzie Johnson is on the drums. It's got a nice little trombone section as well. It's got that nice, like you could. This is Christmas in New York, in a film atmosphere. It's got a great vibe. The next song is Chico Hamilton's Winter Wonderland, and that's Taylor Macero again in New York in '61 with Charles Lloyd, Nat Gershman, Harry Polk, and Buddy Catlett. And it's a nice little swinging piece. It picks up in places here. Charles Lloyd sounds fantastic. The Christmas song comes next by Carmen McRae. And this is from '61 with the great Norman Simmons on the piano, who was an instrumental teacher of jazz to kids and to other pianists. One of my friends was actually taught by Norman Simmons. His one record on Argo is a hard thing to find. It's a tough record to come by. Bob Cranshaw's on the bass on this. The next track is Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer by Pony Poindexter. And this track has a great lineup on it. It's from '62 in New York with Dexter Gordon and Billy Mitchell, Phil Woods and Gene Quill, Charlie Persip, Pepper Adams, Bill Yancey, and Gilda Mahones. It's not just Christmas schlock. These are some real swinging. And Columbia just has access to anything. You know, they have a huge library of artists, and they can go through these guys and even bring them in and have them record tracks. We Three Kings of Orient Dar by Paul Horn is the last track. And I'm going to skip that, but there's Dexter Gordon right there. On side 2, it just continues. It doesn't really relent. It starts off with Santa Claus is Coming to Town by Dave Brubeck. Again, Teo Macero recording. Gene Wright, Joe Morello, Paul Desmond, 61 in New York. Deck Us All with Boston Charlie is a super fun Lambert Hendrickson Ross track. And they're just scatting vocalese in a bebop setting, just ripping out those fucking horns through their mouths. They're brilliant players, man. And let's see who the band is on this. Ike Isaacs, Gildo Mahones, and Jimmy Woodworth is on the drums. Don't know any of those names too well. But then it's awesome. Then it's Deck the Halls with Herbie Hancock. And this is from 1969. And this is how serious this record is. Herbie Hancock with Chick Corea, Woody Shaw, Frank West, Jimmy Cleveland, Dave Carey, the great Al Caola's on the guitar here, and George Vivian and Shaughnessy. That's some serious Christmas jazz. When Hancock's throwing it down like that, and like I said, this track is from 69, so it wasn't on the initial Jingle Bell record, but they added it here and they took Dixieland track off. Just fantastic. If I Were a Bell is next, and it's the Manhattan Jazz All-Stars. Who is that, you may ask? Oh, it's only Teddy Charles, Nick Travis, Addison Farmer, Dave McKenna, Ed Shaughnessy, the great Jimmy Rainey, and Teo Macero plays actually saxophone on this one. So again, he's produced by Teo Macero. That's a pretty serious group. This is not just schlocky. It's actually so up-tempo and swings so hard that a lot of times when I've brought this to DJ, it's almost too bright. It's almost too up-tempo. A lot of it pushes pretty hard. The next track is Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree by Marlo Morris, who's an organ player. I can't tell you much about them, I'll be honest. But Joe Jones is on the drums, Ray Barretto's on the conga. And so you got Papa Joe Jones on the drums. So I'm guessing Marlo Morris maybe played organ with Basie, I'm not sure. But and then last but not least, a very rare Miles Davis track. This is Blue Xmas, To Whom It May Concern, Miles Davis with Teo Macero, recorded in 1962 with Miles Davis, Paul Chambers, Jimmy Cobb, Frank Rehack, a young Wayne Shorter, Bob Doro on the vocals right there, and William Correa on the percussion. And so you got that post-first Miles Quintet group there with some of the guys from the next group already, like Shorter's already showing up, Chambers is still there. What session this was from? It's 1961, 62. So it's before Seven Steps to Heaven. And so it was probably just recorded for that initial compilation for Columbia. And so that alone makes this record worth having. A Miles Davis track with Chambers and Rehack and Jimmy Cobb and Bob Doro. I love Bob Doro. It's a surprisingly good record. One that has stood the test of time with me. And over the years, I've actually found it to be more interesting all the time. All the time I'm like, wow, this is really serious stuff. And we're going to talk about one more record today. This fantastic second quintet, the launch of that group is ESP. And this is a fantastic postmodern. There's edges of the avant-garde at times. Shorter is just that guy with the angles and the compositions that are real. It's a really complex, interesting milieu of sounds, tones, rhythms, time changes. It's of course Ron Carter, Herbie Hancock, Tony Williams, Wayne Shorter, and Miles Davis. Those four kids are all so talented. And Miles does a great job of conforming his former playing and former ego into this new vehicle. He does seem to play something different with this group. These young guys seem to rub off on him in a way. And I'm sure they all looked up to him as well as being their senior. But it's a pretty incredible band. You know, Tony Williams has this bright, full ride cymbal swing to him that's full of little little tick-ticks in there that gives you this little accents, and you just feel it propulsing things almost in the entire history of this quintet. That's Tony Williams, how he's playing. And Carter's just skipping along the surface of the water. And then Hancock at times is just laying back and comping little chords and filling in little blocks. But then when it's his turn to solo, he's actually an incredibly intricate, thoughtful, modern player. And he's capable of playing very much in the blues sense, but he's also a much broader player and composer than just the blues. You know, he certainly was that next breed. And there's even what I would say an ego to the Hancocks and Tony Williams and Wayne Shorters that I think the generation before them probably didn't come up with that same degree of brash confidence. And some of these cats had schooling under their belt. You know, they weren't just from the swing band universities. These guys actually went to the great institutions of art and music and learned theory and graphed the rigidity of composition and theory on top of the loose swing of what jazz and blues is. And it certainly leads to a changing of the sounds of jazz in the mid-60s. And it becomes very much a music that only great virtuosos can play. You know, the guys who are more rooted in the blues and have less theory and music knowledge, I think have a hard time in the late 60s into the 70s because it's just such a competitive, composing-driven art form at that point. It's gotten very much away from just, I'm telling you how I feel, storytelling of the blues, and it's become, we got to remember 4 different chord changes in this song, and there's an interesting time signature in the middle, and it takes a great deal of intellect and comprehension of music theory and math to, I think, approach some of the chords they use. It's the theory has really become an escalated part of the process. It makes it incredibly intriguing to musicians. It makes it very digestible in terms of crossover from prog rock fans. And you don't meet very many guys who are art rock, prog rock, into Asia, and yes, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, who aren't also into this postmodern composition-driven jazz of the 60s and 70s. It seems to very much have that same beret-wearing kind of mentality of all the fans who approach it and dig it. In some ways, Miles keeps this more approachable because he's still playing languid and minimalist and just those sour blue notes, if you will. But the whole album, track after track, Wayne Shorter composes most of it, if I recall. I think he wrote most of it. Herbie might have done one, Miles might have done one, but if I recall, it's pretty much shorter. It doesn't say on there either. But again, this is a record I have on CD, and I listened to it in my car a lot when I was driving a lot for a couple of years, and it's very mystical and moody, and it's art gallery music, museum music. It's got this stoic uh, contemplation. It seems intellectual, and that seems very different to me than the blues, which is a very carnal, sensual-driven art form. This is very cerebral. It's very, I'd almost say it's very serious. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of fun playing it, or when you're even just, it's very much a high art that we take very serious. And it's just a different generation. It's a different generation of kids. It's still a brilliant record. It's one of the highlights of Miles' discography, and certainly it's the best place to start with all of that second quintet stuff is ESP. It's got just a wonderful bridge between what's to come and what's gone before. And once you've been listening to jazz for some length of time, there's no mistaking Miles' second quintet with his first quintet. They sound light years apart, even though they're really only separated by 5-6 years. The first quintet is dissolving and pretty much over by 61. My Prince Will Come, they have some reconstructing of it, but it's on its last legs. And by 65, this new group is in place. And by 62, 63, Shorter and Carter and Hancock, those guys all start showing up on various Miles sessions. And it's not until, of course, 65 here with this record where that quintet becomes a firmly established next great group. But it's a record I definitely recommend to those who love cerebral soundscapes. And again, it doesn't make me sit here and think about protests and the civil rights movement and drugs in the ghetto. It seems to have elevated itself beyond those concerns. It seems to even not really address race the same way. Again, it's become intellectual, and there's more ego wrapped up in its sound and its ability to be played. It excludes a lot of people, I think, in terms of your ability to play this. You have to be able to read and follow, and some of it's more straightforward than others. I think there's some a blues track even on this, but it's certainly on that trajectory. Miles sounds good, and Miles has had a tough go of it here. There's been a lot of pressure on him from CBS. His sales were definitely in decline as we moved into the early 60s. You had this great success with Sketches of Spain. You had great success with Kind of Blue. And now you've done nothing that's approached that in sales-wise. And we're trying to justify the money we're giving you. And you can tell that he feels a little bit more refocused here. He's kind of drifting. He's talked about leaving jazz completely. He feels disoriented by, that first great band dissolving. He's not really finding the replacement for Coltrane in the 5-6 guys he tries in that time. He doesn't really seem to connect with the Mobleys and the Sonny Stitts and the Sam Rivers and the George Colemans. It's a who's who of great players. But it takes a certain type, I think, to play with Miles. And there was drug problems, pain problems, surgery, health issues. There was lady problems going on as well. And so this all had him kind of stressed and frayed. There was more gaps in between his releases, which meant more live stuff, and kind of back catalog stuff was kind of being pushed out there. His recordings become fairly sporadic in a jazz sense. He's doing one record a year, not even sometimes. And a lot of jazz greats could do 3-4 records in a year. but he always wants to not reinvent the wheel, but he always wants to be at the fore of what's happening. And sometimes that takes a lot of listening and looking at what's going on around you. And so he had a tough year, a tough decade, really. And it's when Shorter comes in and starts giving him these fresh new ideas. And Shorter, of course, has been cutting his teeth with the great jazz messenger groups, 59, 60, 61, 62. Some of the greatest jazz records ever are those jazz messenger records of that era. And Shorter is given a different rope with Miles than he had with Art Blakey. When he's with Blakey, everything's up-tempo. There's less room to be melancholic, to be cerebral. It's much more pulsing. It's much more primal with Blakey, with the Messengers. It's much more sexual. It's much more filled with tension of an aggressive type and an African roots recognition that's connecting us to our own proud heritage. All that seems to be emoting through the jazz messenger stuff of that era. And here this again starts to become a different level of connection. A different thought process is happening. And Herbie and Wayne and Ron and Tony, they just have a maturity beyond their years that's actually, and this is hard to say because people get edgy about this stuff, but it's beyond jazz. And that's not an insult. But they elevate because of their intellectual capacities and their virtuosity. They're all top level players. And they've been giving a lot of rope by Miles. He's like, you young kids lead me so I can stay relevant. And so suddenly this great legend and one of the most well-paid, well-respected, best distributed jazz guys in the world is asking these 4 younger generation black kids to help reestablish his footing in the jazz world and in the commercial world. And there's some pressure with that, but there's also a ton of inspiration and space to be explorative. And there's stuff like this that would never have been on a Messenger record. But it's also not swinging in the blues swinging jazz sense. So again, it's kind of like every other genre of music that has this new innovative sound. Imitators come along. There's all these developments that happen, but eventually that new branch just somehow molds itself back into the main trunk of modern music. And there's certainly a lot of elements of the European sound, elements of R&B, elements of the blues, elements of high-level composition and virtuosity. It's just a different being. And you don't have to listen to jazz long to hear the difference between this postmodern jazz of the mid to the late 60s and all the jazz that's come before it. It takes some more experience to hear the difference between bebop and hard bop, or some of the small groups versus what modal playing is. Some of these things are far more difficult to learn what you're hearing. What's West Coast cool? What's West Coast hot? Like, it takes some perception, some years of listening to really be able to clearly define some of these genres and subgenres. But with this era of Miles, this doesn't sound like anything from the 40s or 50s or 30s. It just doesn't. It's just got its own new envelope that it sits in, a new package. And it's post-jazz in purely a definition sense. And again, there's no insult in that. I'm just for me and my definitions, the definition of what jazz is more narrow. And this leans heavily and borrows from jazz and the blues, but it's also expanding and bringing in other things. And there's any of these guys from this era could sit in with the old guys and play the blues. I think a lot of the old blue guys would have a tough time sitting down and playing ESP without some rehearsal, without some time. And it's the same with a guy like Ornette Coleman. Ornette used to kind of scoff at the title free jazz. He didn't really think it applied because there was actually a lot more mapping out than free jazz implies. And he would be annoyed by that. It's like, we're not just up here without any direction. We know we have to meet at certain junctures and have certain number of bars or measures where we know this is going to be the course change. And so there was more construct to it than just a simple go and we're off. It was much more composed than people think. And this is from Ornette Coleman's words. And I'm not even the hugest Ornette Coleman fan. But again, Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, Tony Williams, Ron Carter with Miles Davis. It's pretty high level intellectual music that will stimulate. It doesn't have the sexual pulse of the blues, that same sexual swing, even though there's certainly a lot of pulse to this, but there's times where it completely deviates and does some interesting time signature changes and just approaches music from such new, fresh places that it starts to become a little less comfortable to us. And a lot of what dancing and the sexuality is about: comfortable, simple, repetitive, and abstract and broad dimension isn't always the best for the simplicity of rhythm, for sexuality, for the groove. But this stuff has a hallowed place, and it's some of the greatest music ever recorded. And when you step up beyond the boundaries of the place where you come from, when you become more than just jazz, suddenly you have to compare that music to more than just jazz that's come before it. You need to start comparing it to all other genres of music. And when you put this up against a lot of the classical tradition and just the European sounds and a lot of the other elements that are happening in the world, these records, these 5 records that this quintet does, it's a pretty unique place in the history of music. And it's certainly one that's kept Miles elevated and has kept him very valid to the modern jazz listener who loves the avant-garde, loves the complexity. Those guys have always embraced the second Miles quintet stuff. And some of them won't even enjoy the first quintet stuff much at all, but they love that avant-garde ESP filled the Kilimanjaro as it starts to graft towards the electric sound of Silent Way and the Bitches Brew. So anyway, Miles Davis, I always got to talk about him once in a while. People love to hear about Miles. I can talk about Miles every day. I think people would watch it. And that Jingle Bell Jazz record, it's actually a great little record. It really is. So Merry Christmas to all of you. Happy holidays. Whatever faith, religion, belief system you have, the best of the season to you. You know, no judgment, no pressure. I don't judge anybody for their belief systems. I had a little back and forth with someone the other day, and it's like, it's fine how you believe. I'm not trying to change your spirituality, and you don't need to criticize or change mine. My Creator loves all things. He loves all of this creation. My Creator has revealed himself to all people, not just one group or nation. He loves all of us, and that's what my spirituality demands. And so, again, the happiest, merriest of holidays to all of you. Please stay safe, stay warm, enjoy your food, open your gifts. And for those who sent me some gifts on PayPal for the holidays, again, sincere thank you to you. And for those of you who've been donating on Patreon, thank you sincerely. I've had 56 to 57 patrons for the last 3 months. I can't seem to get over that 57 number for some reason. And I'll get to like 57, then 2 or 3 people drop out, then 2 or 3 will come back. I swear I'm between 55 and 57 now for months. I don't know if they've capped me or something, but it's a weird phenomenon all the same. When I get my first 58 patron, I'll be pretty excited about that, knowing that there's not some weird, oh, you're too new to have more than this many people or something. I don't know what it is, but stay safe, Stay warm. Enjoy your meals. Enjoy your families. Don't watch any more YouTube today. Unless you're watching the Jazz Shepherd, because the Shepherd was more. What's more Christmas than that? Again, thank you all. Be safe. Love you. Peace.